Okay, everyone, welcome back to Line Your Own Pockets. Last episode, we started to talk about how to generate ideas for systems and some good ways to do that. In this episode, we're going to hop into how do we record those ideas? Because I don't know about you, Dave. I find that the ideas come A, where I least expect them, and B, I always tell myself I'll remember that later, and then 30 seconds later, I completely forgot about what I was talking about. So, first of all, how was your week so far?
Yeah, it's been great. I was just thinking about this topic the other morning. Some of you know that I'm a runner, and very often before the market opens, I'll be out on a run, making sure I get back exactly at 9:20 or yeah, at the latest, and be ready to trade by the time the open comes. I was running the other morning, and it was actually an interesting morning. It had just rained a lot, and the sun had come out. It was really bright. And I was running through this stretch of woods where it was really dark. There was a big canopy overhead and sort of a gnarly trail, which I love running through. And so it's kind of dark in here, in the woods, light outside the woods. And all of a sudden, there's this huge flash of light coming from below, like down this hill. I was like, what is that? Like it almost blinded me. And it just so happened that the light was flashing through onto the creek that was near the trail, and the sunlight was just beaming up right in my face, and I thought, "Man, if I was a photographer" I'm not a photographer, but if I was, this exact moment, I would wanna capture, and I couldn't capture it, I just had to remember it in my mind's eye, but it was this perfect moment that just came and went, and it's those kind of ideas that trading ideas that I come up with that I have to have a system for capturing because I do not want to forget those. And I have in the past, and I know I just have to have a system for capturing.
Well, and it's funny you'll never know what you've already forgotten, right? So it's a bit of a conundrum, but yeah, your best idea that you may have had that would be one of your best systems or a complement to the systems you already run, you may have forgotten that you forgot about it, right? And it's the same thing. And I notice I'm not quite a runner, but I like to go to the gym every morning before the market opens and do all that. And it's the same thing. I don't know if been any science done behind it, but it's the whole change of environment, do something physical as opposed to mental, just forget about the thing that you're trying to work on and thinking about. It sometimes that just leads to the best ideas out there. And I've heard all these stories about great minds, sleeping with notepads next to their beds and all of this stuff back in time. I, for one, am grateful that we live in the age of technology. So I think this conversation, we're going to be sharing a lot of commonalities, even though we haven't really talked about what we end up doing because we're so big into technology, right? I'm looking here and I've got all of the things that I need to record ideas, including I think this is probably one of the best ones out there. Just the Apple Watch is phenomenal. But how do you so when you have those moments, you're out on the run, you're doing whatever, and you get that idea, what is the first thing that you go to right away to make sure you don't forget it?
So I have right now settled on the Notion app. So I have one page in Notion where I keep all my trading ideas. And I'm constantly adding to that list. I think it's important that you have one thing you go to
Mhm.
where it's one increasing list of ideas, and also that it's as easy as possible for you to add things to it wherever you happen to be.
Yeah.
So it has to be something you can do on your phone. And when you put something in on your phone, it has to be the same list that you look at on your computer when you get there. So I think that's critically important that um, you remove all barriers to uh, make that idea capture as easy as possible for yourself.
Yeah, and I'm different apps, but the same idea. So I'm an Apple fanboy. I've got, right, everything. They owe me millions of dollars at this point. But a couple things right away. One is the Apple Notes app. I have it's basic, but it works. I have a folder that says trading ideas, and then inside those, just a bunch of notes based on what's happening there. The thing I like about that is, like I talked about with the Apple Watch, if I'm walking, I usually have my AirPods in and all of that. I can just actually remind at certain times and then also at certain locations, which I absolutely love because, like you mentioned, I'm usually out before the market opens and then I want to get home by the time the market opens. So I can actually set a reminder to say, hey, let me know when I get home about this thing. I want to write this down. So that goes from the reminders app that's in your iPhone or your Apple Watch or whatever. And then as soon as I get that reminder that comes up, I know that I'm going to get reminded the moment I get home. It knows creepily enough exactly where I live. So I pull in the driveway, it pops up, and then I can open my phone or I can actually use my iPad, which I never go anywhere without this thing. You just tap the pencil right to the screen and it starts writing you a note. So I'm one that I really like the tactile feel of writing things down, and then I can write them down and they can transcribe it into text after that. But for me, it's that ability to remind me later. I think it is a huge thing because then it's not on your mind
So
now.
here's a question for you then. Let me make sure I understand. So you set a reminder for yourself to add something later. Why don't you just add it right then instead of doing the reminder to add the
Well, the idea might be complicated, right? So it might be something that I want to sit down, I want to actually think about and write about. And if I'm at the gym, I don't want to be hogging the machine, right? Maybe I'm under a whole bunch of weight on the bench press or something like that, and it just comes to me quick. And because I already have the AirPods in my ear, I won't say it because it might trigger a bunch of people's devices, but I can trigger the assistant and say, "Remind me when I get home to do this, that, or the other thing." And I can do it mid-set. I can do it whenever, and then it's completely out of my brain. And it's the same thing, as much as it might annoy the wife sometimes when you know how wives work sometimes. When they say, hey, can you remember to do this later, they actually mean they want you to stop what you're doing and do it now. But I can always just set a reminder for later, knowing that it's completely out of my brain. And it might just be the way I work and my mental capacity is I want it gone, right? When I think about a thing, I want it completely out because I'm usually, if I'm at the gym, I'm concentrating on something, right? If I'm out for a walk, I'm usually listening to something or doing whatever. And yeah, I want it gone, I want it somewhere else, but then I want it reminded enough with some sort of a trigger that then I can sit down and I can devote the time that I think it needs to really flush out the idea.
Okay, yeah. So same sort of concept because Um, I would I would just put it directly into this doc with an abbreviation or something that would remind me to essentially the reminders is included in what I'm putting into that Notion doc. So yeah, I think it's the same sort of concept. I like your system though um for your assistant that will go unnamed. Uh,
Yes.
I think that's good.
Well, yeah.
Um, so one thing that this reminds me of that I think it's important to draw a distinction between. These are not to-do items that I have. These are just ideas. I keep to-dos separate. So, how do you think about those differently too, Michael?
Yeah, and I actually use a completely separate app for that. And it's funny, as much as I'm a Apple guy and I'm not a big Microsoft guy, I actually find the Microsoft To Do app phenomenal because it's just so simple and it prioritizes things by day. It doesn't have anything fancy, not like Notion where you can build all these amazing templates. That I keep separate, and that is, these are the things that I have to do to not get fired, and answer emails and this, that, and the other thing. But yeah, that goes somewhere completely different because, as we're going to talk about in a future episode, sometimes you have a really good idea for a strategy, but it might not be really good right now, right? Maybe, it's not going to be the market for it, or maybe you don't have the capital allocated for it or something. But you want to keep that kind of separate. So the way I look at it is that I have the stuff that I have to do each and every day, and that goes in this one app that's Surface. It's got a widget on my phone, so every time I open my phone, it's there, all that kind of stuff. And then the notes and everything is for deeper things. So, I write a Substack. So if I come on an idea and I say, "Hey, you should write a Substack about this," that will go in more of a deeper mind, or a deeper note. And same with trading ideas. And this I have to give it credit before I forget about it. There is a book, Building a Second Brain. I'm trying to find the author here, and it's talking about this because it is kind of a newer phenomenon by Tango Forte, I think is his name, or I butchered
I've
that
heard of
horribly.
the book, yeah.
And the idea is that, the brain should be used to create, not to store, and not really to even recall, right? It's why would you ever do that? It's like, back in, I remember in school, they make you learn your times table. And I remember the whole teachers, you never have a calculator in your pocket. And then sometimes, right, I'm talking to my parents and they're like, well, what if, you lose the internet and you can't retrieve information the way you were. My argument is if we ever lose the internet, I wish you taught me how to grow potatoes instead of like, because nothing else, everything's gone, right? If we lose the internet. So the way I look at it and the way this author looks at it is that we now have the ability to have two brains. We have the brain that should be focused, and this I think has a lot of parallels to trading that we can touch on, where the brain should be creating ideas, it should be absorbing information and just kind of spinning that around and doing creative work. But when it comes to recording ideas, building things to recall later, all that kind of stuff, we're past the point kind of as a civilization where that's important, right? I will never care in a business meeting if I ask someone, the financials of their company and they go, "Hold on a second." They go look that up. Like why would I care if that's right in the person's brain as long as it's retrievable? So that's kind of how I'm thinking a lot about work and trading and all of this, is that my job should be to create, and then it's the computer's job to store and to retrieve and to do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It reminds me of a book I read years ago, Getting Things Done by David Allen.
Yeah.
Classic book for this kind of thing, like
Mhm.
creating your trusted system. And the trusted system is something outside of your brain that you know you can trust, that when you put something in there, there's a system for you not to forget that. And it's keeping track of that. And, a lot of this is a process of building your trusted system that works for you so that you don't have to have that open loop in your brain of, okay, what am I forgetting? I need to keep track of that. This
Mhm.
lets you, it's totally freeing when you create that system for yourself where you don't have to keep track of that stuff in your head. And you have this trusted system that you know is going to keep track of it for you. That's really kind of an amazing. It was really an eye opening and I would say life changing moment for me when I made that leap.
Well, and you're right, we talk about systemizing your trading and the benefits from it, that it, right, removes emotion, you can test things, and that, right, you're not staring at the screen all day long looking for this 1 minute candle, fancy candle to occur to place a trade, like all the benefits of systematic trading. But there's no reason why it all that doesn't apply to your normal life, right? I don't ever want to have to wake up and go, okay, what am I doing today? Because part of my routine is that at the end of every day, I write down tomorrow's to-do list. I go through and I say, these are the things I need to conquer. And then I can just shut that off. And then also, shut off that part of my brain because I don't want to be spending the time doing that. And, you talked about the same thing, recalling the same idea over and over again. And trying to keep that in memory and how harmful that can be. My example there is another book that I don't know if you've read this one, but it's Deep Work by, I'll find the author, but the idea is there's two types of work that a human can do. There's deep work, and that's you're sitting and you're concentrating your focus, and no one better bug you because it's going to take you an hour to get back to where you were. And that's the important stuff. And then there's shallow work, which is answering emails, and you could have Netflix on while you're doing that, and really, who cares? And the way I look at it is that if I am doing something that's really deep, and in the trading for me now, that's either going through charts to do my macro analysis, or actually creating the strategy itself. Yes, it sucks to get interrupted by, a kid or whatever. But sometimes it can be that thought of, oh, I have to do this thing tomorrow, where, the same as when we're storing a trading idea, I can also push that to my second brain, right? That thought can come up and say, oh, you got to respond to this guy's email. And then I can just throw that. away at the same time and go immediately back to what I'm doing. Where, if you let things go, then you're never able to concentrate on anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you use the term deep work, and I think that book is Cal Newport, I believe. Um, I the way I think about it is it's not just deep work, it's what are the very important things that you're the best at that you can't outsource to somebody else? You can't get a virtual assistant to help you do something.
Mhm.
What are the important things that only you can do? And that's what you should really focus on, prioritizing that kind of work. And uh, that's what you should be, carving out time for yourself to mull over those ideas, to really think a lot about you know, what you uniquely are talented and uh, have the most important skills to be able to create that.
100% agree. And that's the technological side of things, but let's go a little bit deeper on what do you record, right? And I'll use an example from my life that actually just happened, I think yesterday, and this is kind of my process that I want to figure out is that I was listening to a podcast or something. I mentioned in the last episode the way I generate ideas is I absorb content. I go for walks, I do whatever. I absorb a lot of podcasts and audiobooks and whatever. And these people on this podcast were talking about this phenomenon that's been well observed that, and you can backtest this simple. If you buy the S&P 500 on the open and you sell it on the close, your returns are actually negative over time. And if you buy the S&P 500 on the close and you sell it on the next open, then you get all of those positive returns, which makes sense. You're being rewarded for the excess risk you're taking by holding overnight. And that actually got me thinking that I have this prop type account that I'm working on, and I have a certain amount of intraday buying power and a certain amount of overnight buying power. So the overnight buying power is right now unused. So instantly, when I heard that, and these kind of connections got put together, that's what I talked about. I set a reminder that when I get home, I want to start exploring this idea or this opportunity. But getting into the nitty gritty of what to record for me, it's just an initial headline of, right, what if, look to create a strategy that buys at the close and sells the next open. But then what do you write after that? Is it just like a free form brain dump? Is it a list of tasks that you think you'd have to do to get the strategy working? Like, what does that look like?
So that's why I keep those original ideas in Notion, which is a free form thing. You can type whatever you want. There's no form, no fields I
Hmm.
have to fill out. Just totally free form. And and that's because these ideas, there's not necessarily to-dos associated with them yet. Right now is not necessarily the time to do something on them. So a lot of times those ideas just need to stare at you in the face for a while, and just mull over them for some period of time. I mean, maybe forever,
Hmm.
maybe months. Um, and you have to be okay with that. It's okay that that doesn't become a to-do right now. It's not about getting something done. It's about coming up with big ideas that you can turn into strategies and could be life-changing. So, um, yeah, and so as I mull over those ideas, slowly I will come up with to-dos for them. And it may be to think about some tangential thing. It might be um, write some script to test something to gather some data that, won't necessarily have the answer, but it'll be a step forward and might generate other ideas or help the idea come into form more quickly. So it all depends. You have to be kind of comfortable with that. You know, there's not a to do yet for this thing.
Yeah. And mine's the same way. It's right away a headline that when I'm looking through the notes later, it will capture, what it is I want to do. And then it's immediately just a brain dump, right? So, I've got about two paragraphs in there because I got this idea about yesterday saying I have this unused buying power. It's not even my buying power, so I'd like to utilize it off something, right? This is the idea that I have. And then it ends up being kind of a beacon sometimes for, if I have a few seconds, maybe I look up some things and I'll just dump some links. But it just becomes like a brain, like an absolute mess. And then sometime, like you mentioned, in the future, when I have the time, now I can go to this note that's just a complete and utter mess. I can read through it. I can start to, finalize things. I can put things in sections and to-do lists and start testing and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, for now it has to be, the main purpose is I don't want to forget it. I want to understand why I built this thing, and then I want a repository for it, just because, 6 months from now I might still have not gotten to it, but maybe I come across a forum post or an article or something about this phenomenon of this, someone claims they have this strategy that they can predict gaps the next day, which is essentially what you're doing if you're buying the close and selling the open. And I'll just take that and I'll just paste it in there and read this later, and then eventually when it's a page or two long and I have the time to do it, then we can go to that kind of deep work mode where I read through everything I do all the research that I have set up, I start testing, I start doing. But yeah, I think just having a brain dump, because one of the benefits of what I get to do and what you get to do too, Dave, is that we talk to traders a lot, right? So it may just come up in conversation one day and I'm like, oh, I've got all this research. So yeah, it's the same way. Just dump what's in your brain down there so it doesn't escape you later.
Yeah, so this reminds me, a couple weeks ago, my oldest daughter got married.
Oh,
So
congratulations.
and she asked me to give a toast, the rehearsal dinner the night before. Um, so I gave this toast, and afterwards, uh, after the wedding, everything's kind of, the dust is settling.
Hmm.
She asks, "Hey, can you guys, the people that gave toast, my wife did too, can you send your notes for the toast? I'd like to, have those as a keepsake." So I sent my notes, and there were 3 words. That was it. There's just 3 bullets.
Hmm.
They were they were cracking up because I take notes that way, like, in college.
Yep.
My wife would make fun of me because I would sit through a whole lecture and there'd be, like, 2 words written on my page for the notes. So,
Hmm.
um, it I think people do it differently, and in preparing for that toast, all I needed was those 3 words because I had really flushed out those ideas that I wanted to talk about so well over the course of, uh, many runs and rides, and
Yeah.
I had just those 3 words that were gonna remind me, so
And again, yeah, it's just whatever your brain can think of. Now, one thing I've started to experiment with, and I wanted to ask you about this, because I feel like you're not as excited about AIs as I am in our conversations. This is something I've actually been using ChatGPT a lot for. I have this thing open 24/7, 365 on, and I actually just tried it a couple days ago on another idea that I was working on, where I just took that brain dump that I had, I pasted it in, and I said, formalize this into bullet points. And then I also had to do a bunch of research and pull a bunch of articles up to be put in. And I think that there's something there where it can streamline that process of just the random guck that I threw on the page, and something that's nice and presentable, and then also here's all the research from it that I can then take. Do you experiment with these at all, or have you been playing with them?
so I use ChatGPT for various tasks, but that's not one of them, and I specifically don't use it to come up with ideas like that. I think that, like, I kinda don't want it to pollute the way I think, and, I want the ideas to come from me. Maybe there's some part of my workflow where I can work it in for idea generation, but I haven't found it yet, and the ideas it comes up with, I mean, part of the problem I have with this is it's so easy to spot when somebody writes something with ChatGPT
Hmm.
that it's embarrassing and they don't realize it, and I never wanna be seen that way. The stuff I write in my newsletter, I want it to be very obvious that I'm the only person in the world that could have written that, and
Well,
I think hard about that.
and just to clarify, I'm talking about, right, I come up with the idea, right? I write it down in my notes. It's just got a three paragraphs of brain dump. And instead of going through and bullet pointing those myself and then going to Google and doing all the research, what I found is that I can skip both of those by just taking that brain dump, throwing it in, saying, put these into points, and then find me. So, for example, what I'll have it do is I'll say, find me everything that you can look up on the internet for this buy the close, sell the open idea and what it can do, and just present me that. And then I can hone in, because that's something again that I've been finding more and more I'm interested. Again, we've been talking a lot about technology, is that Apple is actually building ChatGPT into the assistant that will not be named. So potentially, I could actually uh, cut out some of that as well, where I could be at the gym under the bench press and say, instead of remind me when I get home, just talk to it and say, this is what I'm looking for. Is there any, research out there on that? If so, put it in a notepad and write this and write, because I think, again, it's about using technology to close that gap from the idea generated by you to having a research point that you can go back to, an idea when it comes to this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and then again any research that's already exists out there, because my
Yeah.
idea is that I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I if there's somebody out there who has come up with some ideas, I want to start with those and then kind of tweak them on my own.
Yeah, I think that's a great use for it, and there's going to continue to be better uses for it uh, for that. Um, what I don't like is when it's really obvious when I see people that are using it in a lazy way and
Mm.
they don't realize it, and it sticks out at me like a sore thumb, and it just gives such a bad impression of what they're doing.
Yeah, it will be a double-edged sword. It's going to be weird, for sure, for a long time. But yeah, I'm with you. Where I think there are some targeted uses that I want to play with, and
Yeah,
as we go on with this podcast, I'm sure we'll find some as well. But I'm with you. Where I think I've done what every trader has done, where you go in there and you say, what's a really good trading strategy, and what it comes up with is just the handful of things that it pulled from like someone's blog or website
yeah.
or something. So maybe if you didn't have any ideas at all, maybe a way that you could start, but all you're doing is you're going to someone's blog and you're reading what they did and just starting to test it yourself, which again,
Yeah.
you know mixed
There
results.
is so there is one other thing I wanna bring up about this whole workflow thing that we're talking about and capturing ideas. Um, there's a tendency sometimes to overcomplicate or over systematize things, like you create to-dos for creating to-dos,
Hmm.
and I think it's important to kind of take a step back and figure out what the easiest workflow is gonna be, and to not make it too complex, to do you really need to use this other app that's just was released and is a cool to-do app or whatever that people are using and you heard about? How is that gonna make your workflow more complicated than it needs to be? So, do you think about that, and,
That's
what are your thoughts?
That's why I use Apple Notes and Apple Reminders, and right, because it's all just it's in there, it's all built in, it's all ready to go. It syncs. It can not to be again. I just feel like
Yeah,
I'm Apple fanboying the whole time, but it syncs to everything else. Like I can attach notes to emails. I can have right calendars reference this, that, and the other thing. And yeah, I'm with you that 90. It's like most things. 99% of what can be done is probably fine in its built-in state, and then anything else after that is kind of tweaking. So I would also say, when I was using Microsoft stuff at school, I used their, it's called OneNote, I think, Microsoft OneNote.
yeah,
It's
mhm,
for most cases, that's what I actually use for pretty much all of my schooling, to keep track of everything as well. So yeah, in most cases, I think the built-in thing's fine. I think you use the simple thing until you come up against a wall, and say, if it didn't, it needs to do this thing in order to do what I need to do, and hit that wall first before you start going out and looking. Because I actually fell victim to this the other day. I saw a buddy of mine, I was talking, he uses a program called Obsidian, and it's supposed to be like the ultimate second brain tool. I think it was actually talked about in this book as well. um and I just Googled it. I said, "Oh, let me check this out." And the tutorials on YouTube for using Obsidian were 3 to 6 hours long, and that was when I just kinda tapped out. I said, "Okay, could this make my process 1% better? Yes, but if I'm gonna need to
Yeah.
watch a 6-hour long tutorial how to do it, I'll just stick to my notes, and it'll be a little bit messier, and everything will be fine."
Yeah, as nerds like us, there is a tendency to try to overcomplicate things. So it's always good to keep that in the back of your mind that about that. I've seen people keep track of stuff just in Gmail drafts. Just create a Gmail draft.
Smart,
The
yeah.
nice thing about that is super simple. It's on your phone. It's synced everywhere.
Mhm.
Very easy. Um, it's sort of a creative way to use Gmail in a way that you wouldn't perhaps thought of.
Yeah, well, and going even lower tech than that, I used to, and when I build my new office, I will as well. I had one wall painted with you can get whiteboard paint, or
Hmm.
so like it's dry erase whatever, and I painted a whole wall dry erase board, and I just had a couple notes or writing tools on my desk, and then yeah, when I'd come home, if I got that reminder from Apple or something, I'd just go and actually write it on the board. If you watch some of my old videos, you can kind of see it a
Hmm.
little bit behind me. But that's, yeah, it's not about being super fancy, although, use technology obviously to your advantage. But yeah, it's just about making sure that you have that ability to say, okay, I have this idea. Let me lock it away. Let me be able to add to it or tinker with it over time. And then when I get the time, which is, I think, what we're planning on talking about in the next episode, is how to prioritize which one. When it comes time to surface it, you'll be glad that you've taken as much detail notes as you can at the time, because you'll forget. And I've done this before too, where you look at a note and you go, what was I even what was I trying to, communicate to my future self here? Yeah, so make sure it's not complicated, but it's detailed enough that if 6 months from now you go back to it, you go, oh, I know exactly what past Michael was trying to say here.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Anything else before we wrap it up? I've got two book recommendations. One is the one we mentioned earlier, Getting Things Done by David Allen. That's a good one.
Hmm.
The other one is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Not
Great one.
exactly related to what we're talking about, but I
No.
just recommended that to one of my trading students this week, and he was in the perfect situation to be reading that book, and he's
Yeah.
getting a lot out of it. So it's highly recommended.
Yeah, I that was actually going to be one of mine on top of the Second Brain book. Atomic Habits is phenomenal for those who don't know. It's just about like what's the bare minimum thing you can do to develop good habits and destroy bad habits. And the perfect example that I think applies to this that I remember in the book was, if you want to learn guitar, make sure your guitar is right next to wherever it is that you're sitting and hanging out. That lag of even 30 seconds to a minute from, I have this bout of inspiration or something that I want to do, to being able to do that thing can be enough resistance to kind of stop people. So same kind of thing that we were talking about, that if you get the idea, you don't want to have to go, okay, let me store that in my head and then go home and have a place to write it down. You always want to have something on you, a watch or a phone or whatever, that you can just go, right, let me know later, and remove that resistance.
Yeah, uh, at least once a week, you'll see me. I'll be riding my bike, and I'll stop on the side of the road to record an idea I have in my phone. So I can't tell you how important that is to be able to do that and to have a system for doing that. It's Your memory's not as good as you think it is, or at least that's what I've learned over the years.
Well, and I guess we've talked about this the whole time without really talking about it, is that physical activity, right? In whatever it is that you enjoy doing. I know I've heard about this pickleball thing. I don't know what it is, but I guess a lot of people are doing it. Running, lifting, right? Walking the dogs, doing whatever. Our N of two study with me and Dave, that's generally speaking when my best ideas come. And this deep workbook that I was talking about, he gives a lot of examples of writers and creative people dedicating time to just isolationist, just going, right, again, walking or doing whatever, to help. surface whatever their brain's working on. It's the whole, consciously focusing on something versus just letting your unconscious, that we know is way more powerful, sort out things in the background and just kind of spit that information. So, not really a fitness podcast, but I guess we kind of got there in a roundabout way.
Yeah, I bet we could do a whole episode on that. I mean, I've got a lot to say about it. I think it's such an important part of my edge, I think. And I believe that deeply.
Well, maybe for a future episode, but
Yeah.
all right, guys, this was a great one. Again, I'm as things go on, I'm loving this more and more as things get, we get more comfortable with it, and we get into the nitty gritty. So yeah, and as we mentioned, we're going to talk about more about strategy development, about prioritizing ideas and all that kind of stuff. So way more to come, and I'll talk to everyone next week.
All right. See you next week.